Hey, good morning, everybody. I think it's Friday, although it's so cold I can't tell. Um, had a good night at the Mohegan Sun last night. Got another opportunity to get on my feet and perform for a crowd. It's interesting. But beforehand, I had sat with some friends, Kevin Allen and several others, at a local pub near the
How's
joint.
Kevin doing? How's Kevin?
He's doing pretty well. He's emerged. He's back on his feet. He's got a new woman on his arm, and he's devoted to God. So, it's one of the few times I sat in a bar and had somebody pray before they're eating. And as he was praying, I could hear the tune from The Exorcist beginning, and I started to have that familiar feeling, that spider sense that who knows what's going to happen next. That wasn't true. It was actually quite sweet. And I was happy to see him happy with another. And she was, of course, so quiet that I began to wonder, was it me, or did she just not have much to say? But the conversation eventually turned to one of those critical issues that I think defines how we live and who we are. And the topic was micturition. Now, you're thinking, who's Mick? Micturition, to pass urinate. And the question became, like, where do you urinate at home? And see, these are the kind of things that you discuss when you're getting ready for stand-up comedy. And I conceded that, customarily, I pee outside. And they said, well, that's a sign of white privilege, because everywhere that I have lived, or the various places that I have owned over the years, have been private, meaning you can't see your neighbors. That's why I've chosen to live the way I do. I'm sort of a hermit that way. And these guys were astounded by that. I mean, you can micturate, without fear of a charge of public indecency? Well, I suppose that's true, or at least it used to be. Let's see what the future holds for me in this, the best of all possible worlds. So it was a good time, though. And I marveled at the similarity once again between being on stage as a stand-up comic and being in front of a jury as a lawyer. In both cases, you are the messenger, and your focus is on delivering to a group of strangers a message. So in a trial context, it's done so under the highly formalized and ritualized rules of presentation of evidence, rules of civil and or criminal procedure, the rhythm of a trial, which would include opening statements, direct examinations, cross-examinations, and closing statements. And all of these are rule-bound and supervised. And so the lawyer's job is to breathe life to the case within that structure. Comedy, I think the name of the game is breaking rules. You want to bring people into a room with a set of settled expectations and then transgress or cross over or break those expectations or do the unexpected. And so a joke then is less a something that is designed to make you giggle. Rather, the joke is the laugh itself. In other words, the insight that one gets from the confrontation of the unexpected in oneself and another. And so I continue to believe that there's real genius to be explored in comedy. I'm a baby comic. I've got a lot to learn. But what I found last night is, when you're working the room, you're trying to get your material out. The laugh, the chuckle is a sort of sonar sort of thing. That's how you know your message is being delivered. If you can get people to laugh in recognition of the simple truth you're trying to tell, reality is complicated. We're all hypocrites. Love makes fools of us all. Then you've accomplished your mission. And I think people like stand-up comedy because it's an opportunity to get a sort of unguarded view into the human condition. I continue to think of Robin Williams and his great extemporaneous gift, his gift of extemporaneously speaking, addressing the world, seeing its complexities and richness, and then just letting himself go. And you fall into his crazy rhythm because he sees what you're seeing, but perhaps can't express. And so it was a good time. I'll be back at Mohegan Sun again in April, and I found out this morning again in May, and be in Atlanta soon, and may be appearing locally in Bridgeport at a potential club that has an open mic. It's not like they're inviting me, but I'm looking to get time on my feet. I'm looking to try to explore the genre.
That's what comedy is, man. Just getting on stage, getting reps in, right?
That's what life is.
Your Netflix special is on the way.
Yeah, maybe. So I want to pick up where we left off yesterday. We didn't really have a chance to address it, and we left a lot unsaid. And that was, this business about the miseducation of American lawyers. Mike spotted a great piece in the American Conservative where the author said, "Look, I'm a lawyer, but I don't know anything about how to define justice. I'm a lawyer. I don't know anything about how to define the law. And the way we educate lawyers is to keep their eye off the ball, and get them focused instead on processing the sausage without ever asking what should be in the sausage, how should we serve it, who should we eat it, what's a correct portion, and so forth." And I thought, I thought it was a useful discussion. He talks, the author, who is it, Frank DeVito, about the encouraging sign of people at law schools getting together to read classic texts, William Blackstone, let's say, or Justinian's Code, or even turning to the ancient Greeks. I know in my life, my education as a lawyer is different than many, because when I was growing up in Detroit in the 1960s, it occurred to me that the Republic wasn't long for the lasting. And so when I had initial thoughts about going to law, I quite literally, after observing and living in close contact with the Detroit riots and its consequences and the anger and rage and dissolution that it caused in 1967, I thought, man, why study a system that's collapsing? I want to know what law and justice are. And so I spent probably 10 years of my life as a high school, college, and graduate student, and then young instructor at a institution that shall not be named, studying, Plato, studying Aristotle, studying Cicero, studying the contemporary authors, all with an aim of trying to understand how it is that we find a sense of coherence and place in the universe. And, I ultimately gave up an academic career because I didn't think there were answers to the larger questions. Yeah, like I used to say, David Hume set me free. He's an 18th century Scottish Enlightenment skeptic, who basically said the reason is and always shall be the slave of the passions. But I thought that Hume was a fascinating study in the limitations of what reason could produce in terms of definitions of a good life and of a good society. But yet, Hume was largely the founder, as it were, of the social sciences. He made observations about how people lived together in groups and what made them tick. And they became the foundation for developing a science of society. But in Hume's case, it was a godless science of society, and a place that really was sort of spiritually empty and vacant. And when I came to the conclusion that if you took seriously the proposition that there were not larger truths to teach, I stopped teaching. I mean, just quite literally. I remember once having a seminar of young students. There was a class at this institution called Contemporary Civilization, a great books course, and every undergraduate was expected to go through it. It began in the fall with pre-Socratics, a discussion of pre-Socratic ancient Greek philosophy, and ended in the spring, somewhere around Marx, Nietzsche, or Freud, or maybe a little bit later, depending on how ambitious your appetite was and how good the students were. And I remember watching the students struggle with some of the texts, and some of them were not doing the reading. And one day I just got fed up because I thought, I'm struggling with these texts. I'm struggling with their meaning. I'm struggling with the meaning of the world in which I live. And these kids are out there screwing around. So I got even with them. One day I got fed up and I walked up to the chalkboard and I wrote on the chalkboard, "Why is there a world rather than not?" ? I said, "Can everybody read that?" Yes. Then I passed out blue books and I said, "You've got 1 hour. This is a pop quiz." and the point of the exercise was not to get them to tell me why, although I still wonder why. But the point of the exercise was to get them to confront within themselves a certain sense of imponderableness, the ineffable in the universe, to question their place in space and time, their destiny and their nature. And I'll be honest with you, when they gave me the essays after they turned them in, I never read them because I really wasn't particularly interested in what they had to say about their place in the universe. I wanted them to feel the need to address the question and to understand that in a class, devoted to Western civilization, to the canon, to the great books, the question wasn't memorization of things for an exam. The question was internalizing. The question was embracing a set of attitudes and a common cultural norm, a set of expectations about how these questions are to be asked and answered. Because in the end, that's what defines a civilization, is a people's response to being in the world and traditions that sculpt that. I was reminded of all that this morning by a piece, believe it or not, in Popular Mechanics that talked about the sort of theory that the world, is consciousness in and of itself, that all things might have the element of consciousness. This is the theory of so-called panpsychism. It's a theory that's easy to ridicule, but as we watch the sort of spiritually emptiness of early 21st century United States and the sort of cacophonous state of our politics, the embrace of identity for identity's sake, and the sort of inhumane and grotesque figures that populate the public landscape, it seemed to me that we had plenty to learn from panpsychism. And what do I mean by that? Do I think that as I sit here today, the microphone has feelings? I actually don't. Do I know that it doesn't? I actually don't. I remind everybody about Brownian motion. The table that your computer is sitting on, or the chair in which you sit, is actually matter in motion, and is composed mostly of empty space. But you sit on the interstices, you sit on the junctures, you sit on the structures that these interactions form. Where am I going with all this? I have no idea. I mean, there's simply interesting ideas. And when the scientific community begins to explore the limits of what we know and be open to the possibility that the traditions that we have thus far been served by may or may not provide all the answers we need, some part of me says, you're right. I know someone who does Indian spiritual medicine, or traditional spiritual medicine, and would I go to that person for stitches? No. Would I go to that person for answers to life's questions? I'd be open to those answers. And why do I say that? Well, I am a well-studied specimen of what the West has to offer. What do I mean by that? 17 years daily psychoanalysis. As I joke on this show before, I put the psycho in psychoanalysis. So here is a system of analyzing the human psyche that is rooted deeply in the Western tradition, in Sigmund Freud's neurological work, and then in his insights into neurosis and character issues, which has evolved into an entire introspective methodology for people considering what it is that drives them, what it is they want, and whether their responses to their drives and wants are adaptive or maladaptive. Basically, that's psychoanalysis, and there are a number of different schools in how that works. So after 17 years of that, and who knows whether I'll ever quit, who knows whether it's done me any good, the question becomes, why? If you come to the end of yourself in the analytic tradition and you realize that you are still naked, alone, and in the universe, and that your response to things is your response, and that you need to own your response and be responsible for it, is it possible to say? Is it possible to rule out that there are larger truths that can't be intersubjectively conveyed, that there are larger truths that can't be ruled out by the scientific methodology, that the scientific methodology is a useful way of knowing the truth and producing goods and services and commodities, but that at some fundamental level it is incapable fully of addressing the needs of that thing which we cannot see, but which we are, and that is a soul. Not quite what you expected here on Law and Legitimacy this morning. To bring it back to the world that you did want to hear about, in terms of the miseducation of the modern lawyer, it strikes me that what we're lacking in law schools these days are questions about and courses about what makes life worth living. What is a good life? Never forget for a moment that when a client enters into a lawyer's office, their life is in crisis. That is, at a turning point. That's what the Greek word crisis means. And the lawyer's job is to identify and help the client identify his cognizable or her cognizable legal interests, and then shepherd the client through a legal process, whether it be civil or criminal, that maximizes those interests. The lawyer's job as counselor is to draw close to the client. The lawyer's job as counselor is to learn the client's interests and then to help them navigate what the law can or cannot produce, with the aim of getting them as close to their interests as they want. The American system, justice system, is an adversarial system, and so it's often violent, it's often contentious, it's often terrifying. And the lawyer's role is to be a good shepherd. I can't tell you the number of times that I have read Psalm 23 with a client, and I'll tell them, I'll be your shepherd. I'll get you through this the best way I can. But you are walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and it is the lawyer's responsibility to shed the necessary light. And it seems to me that our legal educational system would be far better served if the first 6 months or first 3 months or the first month even of a person's legal education were spent touring institutions for the care of the mentally ill, prison systems, soup kitchens, homeless shelters, because it in the dimension in which raw human need expresses itself most directly, we see the universal human condition, which is one of drives, fears, hopes, expectations that are we need to learn to fulfill for ourselves together with others in the world. Thus, the line between an individual and society is at best murky. It's real, but those political ideologies that suggest that only individuals are real in a community, it's not, miss a larger point. In the same way that those who say, in my opinion at least, that the world simply is composed of matter and motion, miss a larger point, that there is such a thing called spirit, and that we may well possess souls, even though we can't define them.
Yeah, Norm.
So, hey, how's that for a Friday morning after not enough sleep in stand-up comedy, right?
I'm following you closely here, and I'm trying to map it onto my experience in law school, because I think what I'm drawn to is several components of my experience, namely my experience as a legal writing teaching assistant in my 2L year, and I think that reading other people's writing is certainly a window into a number of things, but principally and fundamentally, it's a window into their command of the written language, right? Their thought processes, how they organize their thoughts. As we've talked about before, law school is sort of that exercise in a type of cognitive renovation, or at least historically it is, right? In terms of the IRAC format, issue spotting, right? Making sure that you're
What's the IRAC format?
Yeah, so it's a concept that's emerged as a way to organize legal writing for.
Is that as opposed to the Pakistan method or the Iranian method?
It's an acronym. It stands for Issue, Rule, Analysis, Conclusion. When it comes to persuasive brief writing, that evolves into conclusion, rule, analysis, conclusion. Right? It's just a sort of a shell method of organization. And what I became very aware of by and through my experience in law school is that there was, on average, you've got to have something to work with, Norm. As I think that what you're discussing in terms of reform to the legal education system, I love and I totally agree with. I think that the blind spot is that we talked about the Washington State Supreme Court, ruling that the bar exam was no longer necessary. The issue isn't the threshold tests for minimum competency. The issue is necessarily the curriculums have evolved to push the search for personal meaning totally out of the curriculum, right?
Mhm.
DEI in en masse is a mechanism by which morale of the individual is absolutely crushed. It's intersectional, sort of grievance studies based, right? It collectivizes, the public good, and ultimately, young people are not asked to think about these things from a perspective of individual sovereignty and the origins of our country and the nature of property rights and how refined our system became over time, right? And how enlightened that perspective ultimately is within the framework of the sovereign individual. What I think law school has evolved into by and through modern curricula, which really focus on practice ready, regimentation, making sure that graduates of law schools who may not even opt for the bar can nonetheless get out there and hold some menial role in an NGO or compliance for a major bank, right? Pretending to interpret Sarbanes-Oxley and whatever else it ultimately is. And I am also very aware that my search for someone like you, and then my very aggressive pursuit of a relationship with you, mentor mentee, was based on my own observation that at a certain point in my legal education, I had to make a decision about how I was going to deploy the skills and the tool belt that I had earned and given myself to make money in the marketplace, and then work back to those bigger questions, because those bigger questions are what was sort of my personal existential crisis in undergrad, looking around at all the students, scurrying about, following directions without any sense of why or how, right? It had become a paper chase, right? It had become just an extension of what middle school and high school became, right? You're on this track, you do this, you do this, you do the right thing here, you do this, don't look up. And I'm reminded of the famous Kanye line, right? I'm not going to quote it now, but he's got a song that talks specifically about this that's, over a decade old. And he wasn't wrong about when he would put his finger on the pulse of what young people were thinking about. I think that what you and I are doing here ultimately is giving me personally, selfishly, the opportunity to work backward and to be able to indulge those questions now that I am a practicing lawyer in a way that I can breathe life into them through my practice day to day.
Well, I think, in a, in my view, a good education starts from the general and works its way down to the particular. And the general questions that political and moral philosophy face or propose are: what makes life worth living? What is a good life, and how do we live that good life together? Those are the questions that undergird everything in the law. And the failure of legal education to permit folks or require folks to address them is crushing. Anthony Cronham, Kronham, at the Yale Law School, has written on this topic, and presumably some of that's going on at Yale. I don't know. I mean,
going on everywhere. I know. When we addressed this on the stream a couple of days ago, I was very clear, and I maintain, these moves that we're seeing for bar exams to be removed in various states. It's just protecting the bags of the institutional systems that are riding high on the federally backed student loans that are not dischargeable through bankruptcy. And the curriculums are not offering students anything. They're not compelling students to ask themselves anything, right? And they've been coerced to get there en masse from a very early age, younger and younger now, right? Status is what's being sold, not necessarily the ability to do anything, right?
Well, let's see. Law is not auto mechanics, although it can be practiced in that way. And sweatshops that produce pleadings en masse, I guess, do that. But
do you want to talk about metaphysical mumbo jumbo, or should we jump into something a little more concrete?
Let's do something a little more concrete.
All right, let's talk about Blackrock.
Yeah, what's up with this?
So I was delighted to see this, and let me pull it up on the screen here. Delighted to see this. So we've talked before about stakeholder capitalism as a distinct concept from shareholder values, right? So publicly traded companies, or any company, any corporate entity that has investors or those that have contributed capital for the growth of the company to do and to produce the goods and services that it does. Ultimately, what we're looking at with this is the Texas School Fund, which manages, I think, about $53 billion in assets. So we're talking pension plans, 401ks, that sort of thing. And they have announced that they are pulling their entire portfolio, which is the equivalent of $8.5 billion, out of investments into the American market by and through Blackrock, principally because BlackRock is using the aggregation of these sort of passive funds, as they were, right, to coerce Fortune 500 companies to enact policies that are not in the best interest of the company or the shareholders, but rather in the best interest of some sort of hidden initiative, which nobody has elected leaders to bring about, which nobody has invested their money for the purpose of bringing about. And then in the case of Texas, it has everything to do with energy, right? That BlackRock is funding and subverting fossil fuels, right? Actively working against the proliferation and the dependency and the continued use of what has become probably one of the most prominent human achievements in the last couple of centuries, which is the use of fossil fuels to light the world, right? To run our day-to-day lives. For that reason and other reasons, they pulled it out. I've talked before, Norm, about Vivek Ramaswamy and his form Strive Asset Management. The thesis of Strive Asset Management is illustrated by and through what the Texas School Fund is doing right now. It is a recognition that stakeholder capitalism is fundamentally at odds with the individuals whose money is being held and managed and deployed into the American markets, and therefore needs to be shunned.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it's, you have a better and broader comprehension of economic affairs than I do. I view this as a sort of reclaiming a sense of a significance and autonomy in their community. Obviously, the Texas School Fund manages which was created apparently in 1845. And it helps finance schools in Texas, manages, pensions and assets as you've suggested, for people so that they have the ability to retire. Ha! Boy, I wish I had thought about that 20 years ago. But I think that what's encouraging about this is, to the degree that BlackRock has a sort of global portfolio and a set of values that reflect its investment decisions, the people of Texas are saying, well, that's fine, but we don't live in a global community. We live in our community, and we would like the investments made in our community to reflect our values. Now, I can't help but wonder whether one of the big struggles in the 21st century has to do with the aggregation of big data and the unleashing of a powerful algorithm to determine how best to distribute limited resources across across the world, as it were, and that while there may be correct answers to how best to maximize utility for everyone, produced in some algorithmic fashion, we don't want best answers. We want our answers. And so, as callous as it's going to sound, whoever's driving out to a Texas steakhouse tonight for that porterhouse steak doesn't really care that eating it is going to cause harm to somebody in a third world country, if it does, in fact. And these are real tensions in our world, and it wouldn't surprise me if in the 22nd or 23rd century somebody looked back at all of the wild contentions in our politics, the discordant views, or inability to speak to one another, and see that what drove it was a conflict between sort of global imperatives about efficiency and individual requests for significance. In the end, I fear that the algorithms will win as they become more and more powerful, and as big data acquires more and more of an ability to sculpt our experience for us. But I think people are going to go down swinging. And I think that that's a lot of the drama of what we see right now.
Aaron Kinsey, who's the chairman of the board for the, I think, what is it, the Texas Permanent School Fund, as it's called, or the PSF, he says, quote, "Today represents a major step forward for the Texas PSF and our state as a whole. The PSF will not stand idle as our financial future is attacked by Wall Street. This bold action helps ensure our PSF remains, in fact, permanent and will continue to support bright futures and opportunities for generations of Texas students."
Well, let's see what happens. What else do we have this morning, Mike?
We're going to talk about Owen Shroyer. We've also got a couple of other things. Up to you where we go here.
Let's give it. So Owen Shroyer. Owen, we're preparing our certiorari petition to the United States Supreme Court for Owen on the question of whether otherwise protected speech can be used as an aggravating factor in a sentencing in a criminal case. And so Owen is once again taken to the e-world to ask for support. And candidly, the support comes largely to this firm. We are a street-level boutique firm that struggles to provide people with first-rate protection of their constitutional rights, both in a criminal and civil case. And so the preparation of a certiorari petition, its filing and whatnot, is no mean undertaking. Owen has once again gone to give, send, go to request support. And we've put the link up on the screen. If you can help us out, we would appreciate it. So,
how is Owen? Have you talked to him lately?
Yeah, I spoke to him yesterday. We had a big win with the IRS this week. The IRS was trying to assert taxes on him for receipt of gift income through Give, Send, Go. And we were, and it's an open question how that will be treated, whether as taxable income or not. And at least right now, in Owen's case, it's not being treated as taxable income. So that's a good thing,
Well, we can.
And I did appear on the War Room yesterday at at 4 o'clock. Central Time, to talk about his case. And if you can find a link to that, folks, you can learn a little bit more about what's at stake. We did about a half an hour bit.
That's great, man. I'll have to go and find that. You didn't tell me that. You didn't tell me.
Well, man, I'll tell you, it's coming at me so fast right now. I mean, the number of requests for interviews, this, that, and the other thing. It's kind of spooky, and so I can't keep track of it all myself.
Well, did you plug Law Pod Daily?
I didn't. I forgot.
Goodness gracious, man. Goodness gracious.
I know. I'm learning.
Well,
I'm learning.
We will plug Law Pod Daily today at noon. So if you want to take a lunch today and open up YouTube, we will be with the gentleman from Laid Back Law. It's at Laid Back Law Show on YouTube, and we're gonna see where it goes. Norm, I have no idea what the agenda is for this, and I think that's by design, as I've been told. And these typically go for, as you can see on the screen there, they're long form. They'll go for 90 minutes or more. So we'll be on there.
Laid back law. I'm anything. I don't feel very laid back these days. How about agitated and crazy?
I think that's probably going to be better for the viewers, but we'll be there. So if you do drop in, hashtag AMF Yo-Yo, got that on the screen. Let us know you're there. Let them know that we've got people showing up for us. We are looking to use this as sort of a launch pad. So we'll continue to do some more collaborations in the coming weeks. We'll make some, good updates and strengthen our social presence, get a little more organized. We're just two dummies here. That
it's true. We need help. Somebody rescue us. We need an angel investor so that we can hire somebody to help us get organized. Because, I look around my law firm, there are eight or nine people here. And I can't do anything without them. And Mike and I need some help here because much though we have a lot coming at us, our ability to stop what we're doing and focus on it is a little limited,
Yeah, it's me, and it says WTF, Norm. Grift, man. Grift.
How do you do that? Help me, Lord of Grifters.
Plug at LawPod Daily. I've made it so simple. I feel like I'm actually really proud of the fact that I condensed it down to something so easy to remember. LawPod Daily.
Dawn says she quit watching the War Room. Too many weirdos on there. Present company accepted. Look, Dawn, there are a lot of bizarre things. I don't watch any show regularly. Mike and I talk in the morning about what to talk about, and the number of things I don't see is astounding. There's just too much out there. So capture what you can and express what you must. So.
Well, I will. I'm going to be spending a couple of minutes here after the stream, sending a couple of headshots of us so they can include us in the thumbnail, and hopefully we'll see you all there. I'm actually looking forward to this. This will be the first time.
I'll get back to the newsletter this week. It's been a distracting run. So,
yeah.
AMF Yo-Yo, AMF
Yo-Yo. Let's get out of here. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for another great week. Loving how awesome the chat is. Both, and I'll acknowledge Rumble. Rumble's going nuts these days.
Good.
Thank you. It's me again, Jackson Barrett. Always nice to see you, Janet. I'm gonna keep talking so that you feel obligated to hang on here, even though you're trying to escape my clutches.
I've got to go to court. I've got a long drive. Junior Coltrane, stay out of the Bud Light, will you? All right. If I hear another Bud Light joke from you, I'm going to call Dylan McVaney and say that you have transition issues that you want to discuss with it. How's that sound? All right.
AMF Yo-Yo. See you guys at noon, and if not, we'll see you on Monday. Thanks, Norm.
Yep. Ciao.
Bye.